So maybe you're a front-end developer that wants to do a full stack project, or you're just curious about looking into Node, but you don't know where to start. You know that Node is something that lets you write server-side code with JavaScript, and it does some servery things, but you don't know quite where to get started. Well, here to help you with that. So Node is really fun to use. I've been using it for quite a while now, and I remember when I first jumped into it, I remember it was really difficult figuring out how to first set it up and write like an API and understand like what that even meant. So hopefully in this really quick introductory video, we're going to walk through, getting Node, what Node is really briefly, and how to create a quick API. The main goal here is going to be us creating a small API. So first of all, Node is a runtime engine that allows you to run JavaScript on the server. So usually, you run JavaScript in here in your browser, right? You can run some JavaScript in the console, like const a equals blah, 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 right? And this has a JavaScript engine in your browser that allows JavaScript to run. It has a JavaScript engine. But that doesn't work, of course, on the server because the server would need a runtime engine to run JavaScript on a server because that's a completely different environment. That's where Node comes in. So we don't need to get too much in the specifics and details of Node because we're just going to use Node right now. We don't really need to worry about what Node is. There's tons of videos out there if you want to really dive deep into Node and asynchronous requests and handling requests and all that. So anyway, you're going to go to nodejs.org and download it. So you're going to download Node, and once you download Node, you can come back, and then you'll have something called Npm Node Package Manager installed. You can see if it's installed correctly by just typing npm. npm stands for Node Package Manager, and it's a way for you to go out into the Node sphere and the global Node sphere out there and grab other packages that developers have made. Say, for instance, you want to get Bootstrap or some other library that maybe you're familiar with on the front end, and you want to download that to a project. Well, no problem. You do npm install, the project, whatever, and it will save it to your project. It'll download all the dependencies, and it will save it into your project in a folder called Node Modules. We'll get into all that in just a minute. So the first thing we want to do when we are going to create this Node project is we need to make a new folder. So I'm going to do it through the command line. You can totally do it not through the command line. I just think it's a little easier for me to do this nowadays through the command line. So make a directory and call this first node app. Great. Now let's change directories into that first node app. First node app. See, there's nothing in there yet. Okay. Now we're going to need to initialize this. We're going to need to initialize this as a npm node project. So first thing we're going to do is an npm init-y. The -y is a way to set up our npm configuration and just using default. So usually npm would say a bunch of questions like, hey, what's the name of your project? What, all this, that, the other. And we don't care. The goal here is just to make a quick project. So we're going to npm init-y. Bam. Awesome. So you see it scaffolds this little file for us. It tells us about our app, the name, the version, the description, none. We don't care about that. The main entry point, scripts, don't care about that. Keywords, author, license, blah, 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 blah. We just want to be able to use npm to install packages. So now now we have a file called package.json. And package.json is basically a little config file that tells us all the different dependencies that are going to be in this Node project. So let's begin installing a dependency. So npm install Express. Express is a framework that's very, very, very popular with Node. In fact, it's kind of almost become like synonymous with Node. I feel like if you're going to write an API, you're going to want to use Express. So npm install Express. It's going to go out there, do some magic, and it's going to install 50 packages. Holy moly. So let's see what's in here now. Now we have a lot of stuff in here, don't we? We have Node modules, we have package lock.json, and we have a package.json. So Node modules is the actual folder that's going to hold all the dependencies and different libraries that we install. So you see we installed one large library, but it has like a bunch of dependencies, and that's typically the thing people kind of joke about with Node modules being super, super heavy, and that it goes out and does all this stuff. But hey, we don't care about that. We're just here to make an app, not worry about space and all this kind of junk. So let's get down to business here. Let's begin actually writing some Node. So I'm going to my Finder. I see my first Node app hanging out here. I'm going to put it in my text editor of choice, which is Visual Studio Code. Feel free to use anything else. I just like Visual Studio Code because I'm one of those typical San Francisco developers that jumps on all those shiny new things. Also, we're going to need a file here. So let's make another file. We're going to call this file server.js. To really call it whatever you want. I'm also going to open up my integrated terminal in here. Now, this is not necessary if you don't have an integrated terminal. In fact, screw that integrated terminal. I'm going to show you to do this without one in case you are using a different editor or maybe you just aren't familiar with how the terminal is going to work in here. So let's begin implementing and making our little API here. So we're going to do const express equals require express. Oops. Express. Okay. So we're requiring we're requiring the library, the framework that we need to run this. We're going to do const app equals express. We're going to start the Express engine here. Now we can do this. We can make this. Watch how simple this will be. App.get, and we'll have a name for route. So let's say get info, very descriptive route we have here. Request response, and we're going to res.json. We're going to respond with some JSON, and that JSON is going to be a message that says top secret info. We're going to save that. Now we need to tell this app what port to listen on. App.listen. So this is going to be listening for incoming requests. And we're going to listen on port 8000. Okay, so let's walk through what we've done here. We've required Express, the framework we're going to use to scaffold our routes. We've started the Express engine and assigned that to app. Now we're saying app, when you get a GET request and it matches this route, well, you're going to send back, you're going to take in a request and a response. And we're going to use that response, and we're going to respond with some JSON, and that JSON is going to be an object that has a message property. The message property is going to be a string, or the message value is going to be a string that says top secret info. And we're going to listen for these requests on port 8000. So let's go back here, and now you can just do this, node server.js, and I believe this will, yeah, this is working, right? So let's go to Postman. And I'm going to make a new GET request. It's going to be at localhost. It's going to be at HTTP localhost 8000. And I believe our name of route was info, right? Let's send a request. And look at that. Message, top secret info. Sweet. So we've just done that in very few lines of code. Written a very small API that doesn't do anything very useful, but it quickly could. Now we're gonna we're gonna add a little bit of complexity to this. You may have seen URLs or that look something like this. So maybe info name equals, Brian and job equals plumber. So when you see this question mark, that denotes that this is a query string, and this query string has little parameters we're passing in. So we're passing in name and a job. So the name is Bryab, which is not correct, it's Brian. Could be Bryab, screw it. Let's make it Bryab. We're gonna make it Bryab and job equals plumber. Now let's see if we can actually get these out of that request. So if we console.log request.query, save it, and let's open up our terminal. Now the problem is when you make changes, you're gonna have to keep restarting the Node server. There's a really cool little tool out there called NodeMon. If you want it, install NodeMon-G. -G is the flag for installing this globally, because you don't want this just for this project. You're gonna want this to be used everywhere. It's a little, it's a tool that allows Node to restart once it detects a change. So once you save, it'll detect a change. I already have this working, so all I need to do is do this. NodeMon server.js. Unless for some reason you really like, using Node server.js a bunch of times and restarting and killing your app all the time, then feel free to do that too. Whatever floats your boat. I don't like doing that because that's lame. So let's see what we get now. send, and let's see in here. Look at that. Query. The request object has a query param, and the query is an object that has name and plumber. So if we wanted to, we could do something useful with that, and maybe we could, do something like this: rec.query.name and job equals rec.query.job, and the message would be, something cool like this. Your name is Toby. No, your name is whatever you put your name in here to be. It should be rec.query.name, and you are a node expert now. .job. So you're a node superstar at this point. Save that. Now, look at that. Your name is Bryab and you're a plumber. I didn't format this correctly, but whatever, you get the point. I think you see what's going on here, right? So this is how you do, we've just gone over a GET request and how to do a GET request with some params inside of it as well through a query string. Now, while a GET request is pretty common, if you're making a real deal Node app, you're going to want to also have some post routes. So let's do a post route. So post info. It's going to follow the same pattern. It takes a request and response as a callback. And in this case, if a post object is going to have usually it's going to have a body. So it's going to have a body. The request is going to have a body. So we can do something like this just to see what is in there. Rec.body, body. There we go. All right. Now, in order to use the body, we're going to have to do something like this. We're going to do app.use express.json, which is cool. Express offers a way to parse the body as an object out of the request object. Without this, it won't work. So you'll need to use, it'll tell your app, say, hey, use express.json to parse the body out. So let's turn this into a post request. Let's remove these params. And let's do this as post info. And we're going to go to body, raw, text, not text. This is JSON we're going to be sending in. JSON is JavaScript object notation, follows a certain format. So let's put name in here equals Brian and job equals node hacker. Sick. Okay. So let's look in our terminal. See our changes has been restarting from all these changes we've been making. And let's send this. And it's hanging. You notice it's hanging. Look at that. So we have the body, name, job, node hacker. So let's actually do something with that body and send it back in a very similar way here. So we're going to just copy this, put that in there. And instead of query, we're going to change this to body. And we're going to change that to body as well. Save that. Send this puppy again. Look at that. We get some nice JSON back again. So that was a really brief introduction in how to use Node, how to create routes, and how to do a GET and a POST HTTP request. So this may not be super useful. You say, oh, well, what do you, maybe I want more than what this information is giving me. Well, that's a good point. So you're probably going to want to at some point install a database here. That's a much longer tutorial that would be exhausting to go through right here. But the same rules apply. If you installed a database or using some third-party database, let's say MongoDB or SQL, well, you would have some library that is your link between Node and SQL, right? Or Node and whatever database you're using, Mongo, Mongoose. And then you would take in params, like maybe somebody wants to get, let's just do some pseudocode. Maybe somebody wants to find all animals in your database that have an ID of 1. So you might do something like this, db find, 1. Then, with that response, with that animal, let's say in your database, you could res.json that animal. And then you return some cute little animal to the front end for the person to consume. So on the front end, you're going to be hitting these endpoints, by going through localhost and, calling one of these routes. and then you're going to get some information back. Once you have a database set up, it really can be as simple as writing a few lines of code like this to query the database with parameters that a user passes in, and then returning them something from your database. But for now, if you just want to use this and have some fun just making some routes just for practice, this is a great way to do it. Now, this doesn't cover things like cores or authentication. There's a ton of tutorials out there for that kind of stuff. I think the hardest part about Node is just getting started. So once you get this down, you just get started and start playing around with things like the body object and the query object and the request object. Then you're really starting to get a good hang of what Node is, and you can create some really interesting things. Hope you had a good time, and I hope you understand Node a little bit better now and understand it's not that hard to get started making a simple API. Thanks.